So good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. Of course, you can follow. You can also follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Flex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. And so of course, on this past Monday's show, we gave a review of SummerSlam Night 2. And this week I'm going to give my review of SummerSlam Night 1 and Night 2, as well as my review of, of course, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Of course, X-Men 97 Episode 8, as well, along with, of course, I'm going to break down this New Day cartoon that came out last week, which I should have done, like right then and there. But it's definitely been making waves, within these wrestling spaces. But as like I said, of course, first and foremost, I definitely want to talk about the Spider-Man Brand New Day. So Brand New Day, of course. So congratulations to Spider-Man Brand New Day for hitting $1 billion, of course, of the opening weekend. Breaking box office records, even surpassing Avengers Endgame when it comes to opening box office weekends. And as far as that, and so it's just like this is a testament to to Spider-Man's aura, his brand, his greatness, and just a testament to to his reach when it comes to different audiences, and for this character, to carry this franchise, on his own, and for this movie, for this movie to hit $1 billion. So, as a matter of fact, it joins the likes of, was it Deadpool, Wolverine, Captain America: Civil War, once it was, I know, of course, Avengers: Infinity War, and and Avengers Endgame. Let me see, I know, in terms of, in terms of movies that so in terms of the latest like MCU movies that that hit that hit $1 billion, pretty much like right out the gate. And I was like, but the thing about it is that this one hits differently from from the likes of from the likes of like Deadpool versus Wolverine. But yeah, like I said, it's just something that's just unlike any other. I believe that this is the moment where and of course like of course the thing is, we've seen different Spider-Mans. Of course, the top two are always your Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland. And for a long time, Tobey has been the standard, the measuring stick. The measure, the measuring stick in terms of Spider-Man performances. But I would say this and things Tom Holland's done, several, quite a number of of Spider-Man movies and appearances, of course, in Infinity War and Endgame, things like that. In this case, I think this is the time where you could say, pretty much has snatched Toby's chain, Toby's chain, and or rather even his crown as the top Spider-Man, because I mean, in this movie, he was his element to the point where where you went from having to need those web shooters to where it's pretty much synced into his bloodstream, his DNA, and to the point where he was wrestling with with his senses, being just just hyperactive, like super duper, hyperactive senses, to the point where it was just like he just started to lose control. Like to the point where, like I said, it was like I said, becoming a part of his DNA, and like I said, as far as that, like to the point where his eyes were black, and I was like, man, like pretty much like he was just becoming one as Spider-Man, and this was him, just wrestling with the world where people didn't know who he was, as Peter Parker. So this is like post No Way Home, and of course the events after that, and just having to, just having struggled, to go through that. You know what I mean? And I was just like, man, and especially when it comes to MJ and Ned, didn't know who he was, and and of course, I also had the Punisher. Shout out to John Bernthal, what a great performance as well. It's like, I mean that I think that was the team up that nobody knew, nobody thought that they needed, and it was definitely much needed. It was great. You know what I mean? And so of course, shout out to Frank Castle. You know what I mean? Yeah, like I said, as far as that, and of course, what else is on? It's not. I mean, the cat's out the bag already. The Incredible Hulk made an appearance here. Bruce Banner, and of course, Burt Waiter, who's also a professor at Empire State University, and he also had like this inhibitor to control his, to control his rage as the Incredible Hulk, and and of course not only that, but but like I said, just for Spider-Man to to wrestle through the world that that doesn't know that he's Peter Parker, and and of course with the relation the partnership they has with that detective who really cared for his well-being, and it's also important that we have people like that around us, so we don't burn ourselves out or tire ourselves out and everything like that, and at the same time, like Spider-Man, this is this is his thrill. He lives for the thrill of that chase, and that was showed, and so on. And like I said, of course, it's great to see cameo appearances from Scorpion and Tombstone. You know what I mean? And of course, it definitely had a lot of Easter egg references from the comics. And like I said, in terms of just the storytelling, getting pretty much at the fundamentals of the basics of what makes Spider-Man so special, while at the same time having to navigate through through a world that that doesn't know that he's Peter Parker, and especially when it came to MJ not knowing who he was, and even of course even after he went through all that, went through all they went through to save her, and and of course even after she read that letter, and she was like, I don't love you, I don't even know you, and so um, in her in her case, in her defense, I mean, hey, like I wouldn't really, I wouldn't get serious, with somebody who's just a complete, random dude, what I mean, and especially in the state where her mind's been wiped anyway, what I mean, that this is something that Spider-Man asked Doctor Strange to do, and Strange was like, "Are you sure?" It's like, "Yeah, want to do it," and now he's living with the consequences, you know what I mean, and but yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, as far as that's concerned, like sometimes, in MJ's case, I really don't blame her, and so as far as that, like I said, I'm not not mad about that, but slowly but surely, I think she's starting to, I think it's slowly but surely probably starting to get the memory back in terms of who Peter is, and getting more acquainted with him and whatnot. But yeah, as far as apparently there are people in comment sections that were mad that she didn't know who he was, and at first I didn't even get it, but then again, when we look at the context of it, it makes sense, but at the same time, some of the same people, don't want to have any type of, don't want someone like Bucky to have to apologize for for just going on a rampage and crashing out, and being a lunatic and a PTSD serial killer. You know what I mean? Even though his mind was controlled by Hydra, but at the same time, he still had blood on his hands. This dude murdered people. What I mean? Especially when it came to Captain America Civil War, and to the point where like I said, as far as that, to the point where Steve risks his reputation for this dude. Um, but so of course, at the same time, at the end of the day, like I say, there shouldn't be a double standard in that aspect. So, so MJ, doesn't want anything to do with somebody that she doesn't know or remember, whatever. Um, but like I said, as far as that, if anything, nobody, should be hard on her for that. But at the same time, don't want Bucky to, to have any type of consequence. I'm just making a point. So it shouldn't have to be double standards for female characters versus male characters. It shouldn't have to be that case. But yeah, that's just a little, just a little observation. But yeah, and also another thing is that I said not to take up time, but the thing is, of course, I like the introduction of Jean Grey in the MCU, and and for her to essentially be the villain and just just taking over everybody's mind, and I'm like like seeing it and just wondering all of a sudden people just that started calling him out and know who he was, just complete strangers, just find out who he was, and what I mean, I was like, wow, and the whole time I'm like, what is going on? What is going on? What is going on? And then then eventually, of course, we found out who it was. This whole time it was Jean Grey, and not only that, but the same Jean Grey was also in Stranger Things. I was like, oh, I mean, I thought I was like, yeah, I was like, you know what? I realized that she looks familiar, and sure enough, that's her, red hair and everything. And so and of course the thing about it was that of course in this movie Gina crashed out because her sister had gotten tranquilized and captured, and for all we know, she's pretty much dead at this point now. But yeah, I was like, oh, so this is how we're introducing mutants. Um, and so I was like, wow. And the thing about it is also that that the technology that Peter was using, was just some next level, heavy level stuff in of itself anyway. And but also, to see Jean just completely just go scorched earth in that room, I was like, whoa, and also with Spider-Man was fighting, fighting that assassin guild, the group of ninjas, so I read ninjas called the Hand, which are of course the ninjas from the Daredevil series. Like I said, he's fighting against the Hand, and the way that he took them out, I was like, it reminded me of video games. And the part that got me was when Jean, through her telepathy, asked Spider-Man. She said, "Are you Peter Parker or are you Spider-Man?" And he zooms in. He says, "I'm both." I said, that right there. That was my favorite line. That was my favorite moment right there. For him to embrace, both parts of his identity. You know what I mean? It goes to show that you don't just have to be one thing. You could be multifaceted. You could be, many things at this, wear different hats at the same time, pretty much. And I seen Spider-Man. I was like that moment right there, like that was, you could tell, yes, he is him. This dude is him. And I also like the latest Spider-Man costume, and certain details, and it's definitely more polished than a few of the other Spider-Man costumes that I've seen. It's definitely moved up the ranking. You know what I mean? And like seeing it, like I said, especially of course, whether it was especially when we came to the spider level in front, and my favorite one was of course the one that was on his back. I was like, yeah, that's like I said, that's pretty special. That was, and of course not only that, but how Jean was able to save Peter's life when the Punisher accidentally shot him, even though he was going for Jean. And I was like, oh man, and I also like that, how they, how Frank and Peter devised that plan so that Peter could, get out of the hospital, and Punisher had his Spider-Man mask, and so everybody was thinking that was him, stuff like that. But it's like this movie right here is just a testament, to like seeing just what this character brings to the table, what makes him unique, and just and I'm gonna say it like this, before I get into like all this other stuff as far as like X-Men 97 and the wrestling conversation. Apparently, there are some people who probably got their spandex in a bunch, in a wedgie, or whatever. As soon as I said that, Spider-Man has become the most popular um, comic book, character, like I say, comic book character, a hero, of all time, right? And to the point where he's, surpassed Superman's popularity, because shout out to Kaz, he was the first one who asked the question, as far as like who's more popular, Superman or Spider-Man, to the point where he's got enough Spider-Man responses to where he had to apologize. I was like, yeah. So I brought that up, brought that up to my social media, and there are quite a number of people, who did say Spider-Man, and also, shout out to those who defended my case, brought up numbers, brought up statistics, metrics, things like that, right? Especially when it comes to merchandise, box office, streaming numbers, things like that. Now, in terms of overall financially, Superman is, overall winner from a financial standpoint, just because he's been around much longer. So because he covers more ground when it comes to the longevity aspect. But make no mistake about it, when it comes to who has changed the complexion of superhero fandom, when it comes to demographics, when it comes to popularity, when it comes to like how many different audiences that you reach. Spider-Man covers more ground because especially when it comes to his story is very youth driven. He is someone who is more relatable. He is someone that everybody can see themselves in. And I think that was, I think that was like the main point behind Stan Lee for the character, because even though he has a mask, anybody can see themselves behind that mask. To the point where we also have Black Spider-Man, Miles Morales. We have, also they said Miles Morales. Was it Miguel O'Hara? I think Spider-Man 2099. Spider-Man is Spider-Man with different races, colors. They even was it Spider-Gwen, Spider-Woman. All these, all these different versions. Not saying Superman doesn't have Supergirl and stuff like that, but Spider-Man transcends, so many different age groups and backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, cultures, and things like that. Like from a comic standpoint, if I were to compare it to music, I would say that Spider-Man has tapped into a deeper audience, if you will. I would say his popularity, people may not agree with it. I would say that that his popularity has eclipsed Superman's, much like how Michael Jackson's popularity has eclipsed Elvis Presley. It's not a hot take either. It's really not a hot take. you know, because the thing is, Spider-Man doesn't need a movie. He doesn't need a premiere just for just for his just for his merch to sell. Matter of fact, uh, like as a matter of fact, even when I saw the movie, the seat charts were filling up. And some people may say, "Oh yeah, this is a recency bias." No, the thing is, like this is more than just the 25 years since the first Spider-Man movie. Like Spider-Man has been gaining traction even since the '90s with the animated series. You know what I mean? And other forms of media and everything like that. And so the thing is, of course, the big three is always Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman. But the thing is, for Spider-Man to have a to hit 1 billion, without it being, without having Avengers assistance and everything like that. Um, of course, of course, even though the Hulk, the Hulk, of course, even though the Hulk made an appearance in this movie, but it's not like, you know, uh, it's not like he was doing, not like Spider-Man was, Hulk was doing some type of Avengers team up, with Thor, Captain America, and all them, whatever. It's not, it wasn't like one of those, but for a Spider-Man movie, to put to do these type of numbers with this type of magnitude, um, you know what I mean, like without all those bells and whistles, that speaks volumes, to just the Spider-Man brand in and of itself. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, as far as that, let me see if wow, see something, but um, yeah, and it was definitely, it was definitely an ongoing conversation in the comment section. I was like, man, 'cause as a matter of fact, it's already been said that Spider-Man is the most popular superhero in the world, consistently dominating global search traffic, box office earnings, and merchandise sales. So that means he's searched more than Superman, more than Batman, more than anybody else, right? Box office earnings, obviously, this one, along with the other movies, especially when it comes to the MCU ones. Um, what I mean, like no offense to the previous ones, but he's got a catalog of movies anyway. Like I said, global search traffic, box office earnings, and merchandise sales. You know, and then when it comes to top three superheroes globally, Spider-Man is number one. Spider-Man has a global reach that very few, um, you know, superheroes, have. You know what I mean? Like, like I said, that's why I said why I said in terms of him, in terms of him, being in the comics with I guess you could say Michael Jackson and some music. You know what I mean? So, matter of fact, let's see real quick. Move on to this. Yeah, it says top three superheroes globally. Go to this real quick. And we already know, who the big three are anyway. But yeah, matter of fact, like I said, as far as that, where it says Spider-Man consistently ranks as the world's most popular and profitable hero, driven by massive global box office returns, merchandise sales, and broad multi-generational appeal. That's where I was getting at. He has a multi-generational appeal in ways that no other hero has that I can think of. Superman included, Batman included, as great as both of them are. But Spider-Man has broken the mold in so many different ways. Um, where he's become a game changer. Superman is the pioneer, but of course, Spider-Man has become the successor. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon ever. So yeah, with that being said, um, I give, like I said, I give Spider-Man, Brand New Day, 10 out of 10 WWF Winged Eagle belt. If I were given a belt, right, that's what I would give. Uh, and then next up is time to talk about X-Men 97 Episode 8, uh, Dead Man's Hand. And this was the episode, we saw, like, the episode where we see, the return of Gambit. And so I was like, and of course, we see, Gambit return as the Horseman of Death. No surprise, no spoilers. We all know. And so this episode definitely gave um, callbacks to the X-Men, the X-Men anime series episode, externally yours. Um, as far as that, on this time, Gambit's undead, mutant, almost like pretty much an Undertaker, a mutant version of Undertaker, pretty much. That's what he is. And so as far as that, we see, the X-Men, like doing everything they can to save him. And Gambit, has his own army, and it just goes to show, like what type of omega level powers that this dude has when he's not nerfed. When the game is just unchained. I was like, man, and this is him trying to rekindle his romance with Rogue. So as far as that, and I think it's one of those episodes where it's become there are quite a few mixed reviews. It almost feels almost like filler. As far as that, but I will say though that when Gambit had Nightcrawler control, and of course I think enough people aren't seeing this, but with the way that they Gambit, Nightcrawler was putting BTA on the whole X-Men team, I was like, whoa! It reminded you of a Dragon Ball Z fight, and with the way that the camera angle went, it was like everything just showed Nightcrawler's point of view, like a first-person shooter game. It's just like whenever he's teleporting, and whoever's gonna punch, like I said, just shows his point of view, and just like boom, I was like, man, and like he was putting BTA from Cyclops, Jean, Storm, Cable. I was like, oh my gosh, like Nightcrawler goes off. I mean, like I said, Nightcrawler is nothing to be played with. I was like, wow. And this is Nightcrawler without the swords. Like this dude has become an unsung hero, MVP type of character. They have elevated this dude in X-Men 97. Now, and of course, not saying he wasn't a big deal in the original, because he was. Side note, the guy that played the voice of Nightcrawler in the original series has come back to play the voice of Nightcrawler right now. But to see Nightcrawler get his shine, like to get his flowers, to get his roses, or whatever, I was like, man, especially that fight sequence. I was like, all right, now go off, get in your element, but of course, eventually Xavier gets into Gambit's mind, and doing everything he can to get to separate Gambit from Apocalypse. But the only one who's ultimately able to do that is Rogue. Even though Cable wants to gun Gambit down, but his plan gets shut down, gets stopped. So now, at this point, X-Men are back together, and of course, it's just X-Force been reduced to three. Of course, we got Cable, Cyclops. Not Cyclops. It's Cable, Psylocke, and Archangel. And not only that, but of course, Nightcrawler's even putting hands on Archangel too. I said, oh man, matter of fact, if there's any fight scene I watch over again on a repeat, on a time loop, it'll be this one. But yeah, it was definitely meme worthy, and so yeah, that's what it is. So if anything, so if anything, nobody was spared, at the expense of Nightcrawler. But there are people who say this episode felt kind of flat. I wouldn't say completely flat. Um, would I rank it as high as some of the other ones? Not quite. I think it's right on the level probably of um, that Wolverine episode. It was Weapon X lies and DVDs, like right there. So I would not rank this higher than episodes 1, 2, like 3 and especially 4. No. Um, so it's just like it kind of takes a little dip, and then things pick back up. By the time we get to episodes 6 and 7, especially last week's episode with Colossus. Oh my gosh! Like that was unreal. Um, you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, this one isn't too bad. And then I think this is the part where people start to see that slippage as far as how the show looks about Bo DeMaio. Of course, we know that he got, of course, we got fired, for being freaky. Um, of course, on his own social media pages and stuff like that, and just and other things. But that's another story here nor there. But it's I think this is the part where where people starting to see see that sudden sort of change in the tide when it comes to the writing and the direction and production of the series. And so, and of course, episode 9 is going to be the last episode for season 2, and that's of course, Summerslam. Of course, that's next Wednesday, and I can't wait for that. Now it is time to go into the wrestling combo. Um, Starting off, which I should have talked about last week, we see that the New Day made their own special announcement about their official departure from the WWE. So as we all know, that they were under a 90-day no compete clause, right? So they had, I guess, requested a release or walked off, left, whatever. Made their exit back in May. So so as a matter of fact, last week that was a compliment. That was a confirmation to let everybody know that that their no compete clause up, and they're free agents. And so in the cartoon that they had was Kofi and Xavier as unicorns breaking out of the circus, right? And WWE under the TKO regime has definitely become a circus. So it was very fitting that they used that illustration. And what really got a lot of people, including myself, was that one unicorn, as Kofi and Xavier are racing out. There's one unicorn that is, locked in, and his horn is broken, and as Xavier and Kofi are leaving, they give him a nod, and and that unicorn with the broken horn nods back to him like, "I wish you that," just give him a look like, "Hey, I'm proud of you. I still support you, right? Even behind, even in here, I'm, still support you, basically." And so that unicorn with the broken horn, that was Big E. That was definitely the Big E unicorn because of his injury, as we all know, which cut his career short, right? So the fact that they had to leave him behind, and of course, Big E, Big E gave the thumbs up, gave his endorsement, and he was like, no matter what, I still support you. Pretty much, that's really what it was saying. And I think that Ringmaster, you know, he really gave Triple H vibes, you know, uh, as they were, as they were leaving the circus. And so once they break free, the horns are gone. They're no longer unicorns. They're back to their human form, and I was like, that was just the official send off. Like, this era is over. That chapter is done. That story is finished. It is gone. And that was a painful reality um, to witness, because you would think that the New Day would be WWE lifers, and the thing is, they have accomplished enough. They have, made a big enough mark where, where they should be lifers. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And I know Big E was, being very diplomatic and, and filtering his words, but in that recent Chris Van Vliet interview. But if I were to translate, plain and simple, TKO played in the face of their money. Well, played in the face about their money, and they left. That was really the situation with Big E's fellow New Day, uh, New Day brothers. Of course, Kofi and Xavier are now Austin Creed. But yeah, that's really what it was. Which then nothing but the absolute greatest, nothing but the best. There will always be one of the absolute greatest tag teams of all time. Where you rank them, that's on you. Uh, but nothing can erase uh, the imprint, the legacy that they left on tag team wrestling. Period. Even though everything was in WWE, but like I say, regardless, it is still big enough to be in the conversation of just overall tag team wrestling all across the board, regardless of promotion. Right. Um, yeah, I've praised New Day so many times. I've done episodes about them. This podcast defends New Day no matter what. And that was quite a send off. That's rough. But on a lighter note, I'm going to finally get into SummerSlam. I didn't want to be long winded about it, but here we are. SummerSlam night. SummerSlam took place at of course, like I said, WWE SummerSlam took place on the weekend of August 1st through the 2nd at US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and of course you saw that. Of course you saw the major highlights included Roman Reigns defeating Seth Rollins, CM Punk turning back, defeating Cody Rhodes, and Kevin Owens making a surprise return. So the match card, the night one match card had Fatal Influence versus the Bellas and Paige, Gunther versus Nick Aldis, LA Knight, Solo Sikoa, and Royce Keys versus the Bloodline, Liv Morgan versus Io Sky, CM Punk versus Cody Rhodes, and Open Femi versus Brock Lesnar. Night two consists of Danhausen versus Dirty Dom Mysterio. At first, it was Finn Balor versus Sami Zayn, but because of KO's return and along with the inclusion of Gunther, it became a fatal four-way number one contenders match for CM Punk's WWE title. We also had Baron Corbin versus Trick Williams. Next thing, it was Kevin Owens. Like I said, Kevin Owens' return, it was going from Finn Balor versus Sami to KO, Finn, Sami, and Gunther. Fatal four-way for to as the number one contender for Punk's title. But anyway, I ain't gonna repeat myself, but like I said, as far as that, we also have Baron Corbin versus Trick Williams for the U.S. title. We have the five-way women's ladder match for the interim WWE Women's Championship. Chelsea Green versus Charlotte Flair versus Jade Cargill versus Tiffany Stratton versus Lash Legend, who defeated Julia to get that final spot. We also had Chad Gable versus Penta and Roman Reigns versus Seth freaking Rollins in the final chapter of their feud. So for night one, I went 4-6 in my predictions. Night two, not so much. Unfortunately, I went 2-6 on those predictions. I was like, man, so much for that. But but of course, night one, I saw right after I came from seeing Spider-Man, and so as far as night one, surprisingly, LA Knight and Solo scored. Whereas Keys defeated the Bloodline, and Solo was trolling Jay, of course, by running it back and do the like I said, running back and doing that the yeet, chant. And I was like, oh man, so he definitely played in his face. It definitely gave younger sibling vibes. I thought it was hilarious, but it was definitely a surprise though. And of course, you saw that Liv Morgan defeated Io Sky to retain the WWE Women's World Championship, to call herself the greatest women's world champion of all time. I'm not gonna, not gonna hold it up that long like that, but yeah, like as far as that, like if anything, that women's world championship match was definitely better than, quite frankly, than I expected. I never, questioned, what Liv can do in the ring, but she's definitely improved by leaps and bounds, especially when it comes to, as far as a mic work. Some of her character standpoint, and so yeah, so as far as that, and then we also, of course, we also had, like I said, had Gunther. Like I said, we also had the fatal influence to defeat the Bellas and Paige, only for the Bella twins to turn on Paige. Unfortunately, Brie Bella suffered a shoulder injury, and so it definitely derails, what a potential storyline they could have had. And so what else? Like I said, as far as that, the Ring General Gunther defeated Nick Aldis. I saw that coming, but Nick was very impressive in his return. And so I was like, and of course I knew that Gunther was going to win, but Nick definitely put up a really good fight. It was great to see Nick with his family, with his wife, Mickie James, who should be in the Hall of Fame, and their son. That was definitely great to see. And so of course we also saw that CM Punk defeated Cody Rhodes for the Undisputed WWE Championship, or rather to retain the championship. And we saw that the Street Fighter plug-in, shameless plug, where Cody Rhodes tapped into his Guile character, where Cody even had Cody even had the camouflage on his tights and on his jacket, and even with his helmet, had the same hair as Guile. For his helmet, I said, "Wow, okay, I see what we're doing." But I will, like I said, I will give, I will give WWE credit for for the way that they use AI in that aspect. Even with Cody's, Cody's Street Fighter entrance, I thought it was very, very clever. CM Punk. At first, I didn't get where he was coming from. Come to find out, it was a tribute to a Minnesota hockey team called the Minnesota North Stars. I was like, all right, what are we doing? I see him wearing green. At first, I thought he was trolling Minnesota with Summerslam. At first, I think he was trolling the fans with Green Bay Packers colors. And that was definitely enough to create a meme. Because it was definitely giving Packers vibes. That's why I did the meme. Showing a picture of Brett Favre. It gave off the Oakland A's colors. Almost like Reggie Jackson, or even the Seattle Supersonics, like Gary Payton. So when I saw that green and yellow, that's all. Those are all only things I could think of once I saw Punk come out like that. Until I found out, within that same time frame, and his jacket had 20 on the back, celebrated 20 years of CM Punk, even though he spent a whole decade away from WWE. But I digress. So, the match was what was, even though Punk missed the moonsault, You know, what I mean, there were some things that kind of took points away from that, but in the end, CM Punk ends up winning, and especially with the return of one Randy Orton, Randall Keith Orton, that is, with an RKO on Cody and a wink to the fans. You know what I mean? So I was like, all right, cool. So I was glad to see Orton finally come back after 4 months. And last but not least, for night one, we saw Obafemi defeat Brock Lesnar inside of Hell in a Cell. Uh, that match wasn't that long, and wasn't as physical, as some people, so it was probably not as physical as some people wanted it to be, and so it's not like at this point I was, it would have been cool, but I guess because of Brock's age and some of the limitations, I guess they weren't going to go all the way out and have Oba throw Brock off the cell or slam him through the. They were going to have him throw Brock off the cell, or even slam him through the roof of the cell, which would have been great, you know. But at the end, Obafemi wins, and Brock even did a tombstone in reference to the Undertaker, and like and not only did he do a tombstone, but Brock even ripped the mat right down to the wood underneath the mat, and so he gave him a tombstone. Oba kicks out, and Oba gives him the fall from grace powerbomb for the win, and your winner of this match, the ruler Obafemi, and Brock even gets the microphone and congratulates Oba and declares him the future of the WWE. He's the next big thing, and so he has passed the torch of being the conqueror, the beast himself. That is now Obafemi, and Oba himself on Monday even said that he is the one that's going to carry the torch for the next generation of stars, and he's definitely got the biggest endorsement from Brock Lesnar himself, not only from Brock Lesnar but even from Roman Reigns after WrestleMania. So, he's definitely going to put the other rocket on his back, even though Oba, has been having his fair share of critics like Bronson Reed. He's definitely giving a hater from outside the club, and that type of energy makes you lose cool points. In my aspect, at least not in my at least in my point of view. Even though, of course, even on Monday we definitely seen seeds being planted for an Oba versus Braun Breaker feud, and this is definitely a great way to rehabilitate Braun Breaker's image right now. And of course, not saying he's washed, but at the same time, for him to be spinning his wheels in an ill-fated group like the Vision, he definitely deserves better. I think this is a great thing that could be enough to to light a match under Braun, right? What I mean? So as far as that, and the thing is, Bronson Reed's criticism definitely reminded me of Piper Niven saying about Jay Cargill. What I mean? Like that hater vibe right there. When wrestlers go on the internet to spew their jealousy. Nah, that's not cool. That's it. Like I said, definitely makes you lose points from my view. But that's neither here nor there. Like I said, the ruler himself, Obafemi, like he was phenomenal. And on Monday, he of course came out dressed in white, and of course made that proclamation that that he was, like I said, the one who's going to lead the next generation. And it definitely gave off Black Panther when T'Challa, as I said before, he looked, he dressed like T'Challa when he went to that ancestral plane in all white. That's all I can think of as soon as I saw Oba dressed like that. But Oba's proud of his Nigerian heritage. He's proud to put that on display in a platform like WWE. Hey man, go for it. So yeah, and so that's pretty much it for night one. And like I said, night two, we saw Danhausen defeat Dirty Dominic Mysterio in the Human Money's on the pole match. I picked Dirty Dom, but of course Danhausen got the feel good win As far as that's concerned, um, in the way, like I said, with Kevin Owens' return, he defeats Finn, Sami, and Gunther to become the number one contender. Of course, now we're going to get KO versus CM Punk. I can't believe it's something I've never seen before. I don't think it's ever happened even ROH. So for their paths to finally cross, it's been a long time coming. Baron Corbin surprisingly defeats Trick Williams for the United States Championship. Like right after Trick had, right after Trick had gotten that custom U.S. title with the white fur around it, and and then you turn around and he loses the belt. I was like, man, I'm pretty sure that you got a lot of people who ordered that belt probably hadn't even shipped yet, and this dude already lost. I was like, they flushed some serious money down the drain with that one. But also, it's been said that at the same time, this could free Trick up for elevation, especially on the main event scene. So, I think it's going to open the door for him to go on the Money in the Bank. As far as that's concerned. But Trick, he's definitely got that aura with him. But in terms of Baron Corbin, I'm like, where are we going? It's already bad enough that Baron beat Trick for the U.S. title, but then on Monday, Big Cass comes back and targets Javon Evans. So you have, two rising up and coming stars who happen to be black dudes, by the way, get beat up, and feels like they are used as instruments to rehabilitate the image of two guys who already had their time in the sun. Two guys that nobody asked for a comeback. And the optics of it just don't sit right with me. And I'm not the only one. Optics of Trick, a black dude, getting beat by a white guy in Minnesota. Come on, TKO. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, and they're not beating them allegations. And for Javon to get beat the way he did, by Cass, I was like, yeah, they're not beating those allegations. They want to throw that in everybody's face. Should be ashamed of themselves. I'm like, it's definitely enough to make you almost want to throw up. But I digress. Chelsea Green surprisingly defeats Charlotte, Jade, Tiffany, and Lash. Charlotte Flair, Jade Cargill, Tiffany Stratton, Lash Legend. And a side note, it's already been confirmed that Charlotte Flair and Jade Cargill are going to face each other on Friday night on SmackDown. So I'm excited for that. And of course, I'm glad that Tiffany did not win. You know what I mean? Because clearly there are not. There are three hometown stars for SummerSlam weekend: Brock Lesnar, Chad Gable, and Tiffany Stratton. So out of all of them, I'm glad that Chad was the only one to win. And we saw the stare down between Jade Cargill and Lash Legend. So that's definitely a long-term booking. In and of itself. And I think sooner than later that they're going to, they're eventually going to end up pulling the trigger. And I can not only that, but I can definitely see them. See this is definitely the start of the breakaway from between Lash and Nia. The fact that Nia, missed out on qualifying for the ladder match, but Lash made it. Again, it's definitely starting to plant some seeds with that one. But of course, Chelsea Green ends up winning, and so of course, there's he definitely made sure to rub it in Michael Hayes' face, especially since he was since he was known for being known for being one of our biggest critics, especially with WWE Unreal. And so I guess I figured that with her. With her being so popular on Unreal, that was going to pull the trigger with that one. And first, I would pick Jade and shout out to Jade for her tribute to Prince, with her gear. Like seeing Jay came out, like seeing with a long purple, uh, came out with a purple trench coat with the Prince symbol, with a lightning bolt as well. I was like, yeah, that's definitely her. So I definitely like that the tribute to Prince. That was amazing. What I mean? But of course, in the end, Chelsea is the winner, so she's the interim women's champion. First, like I said, I wanted Jade to win, especially the clap back against someone like Chelsea, but whatever. Chad Gable defeats Penta for the Intercontinental Championship. Congratulations to Chad for winning in his hometown. If there's anybody who deserved it in Minnesota that weekend, it was definitely him. From Minnesota who deserved that weekend, it was him. He came out, with the Minnesota Vikings colors, purple and yellow. And I was like, all right, great. And of course, like I said, it was meant for him to win. Penta enjoyed his time as the IC champion, but Chad definitely deserved it. He's been working for it long enough. And finally, Roman Reigns defeats Seth Rollins, for the final chapter in their story, in their saga, in their rivalry. And it was only fitting that Roman would win without the bloodline, without any type of interference, without having to use a chair. I'm glad that they did not go that route. And I'm going to be honest, even though I picked Roman to win, but to hear some of the people who was going with Seth and some of the reasoning and the way the match started to play out, I was starting to get some type of anxiety. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to hold you. But there was the point where the momentum was starting to change, especially when Roman threw the chair away, and he was like, let's go for a man-to-man, plain and simple. And they pretty much fought till they were exhausted, And I did like the tributes to Dean Ambrose / Jon Moxley, with Seth doing the with Seth doing the other buckshot, lariat clothesline, Roman Reigns doing dirty deeds, stuff like that, and how they, with the way they counter each other, and even use some of their own moves. Seth doing the spear, countering Roman's spear into a pedigree, all those things like that. Roman doing a buckle bomb, both power bombing each other into the announce table, going to the crowd, you name it. They threw everything that they had into that very match, and they did not disappoint at all. At first, I didn't know what Seth was wearing, but come to find out, he was supposed to be a costume, his Buzz Lightyear tribute, especially with Toy Story 5 coming out, to Toy Story 5, which came out this year. So I was like, all right, cool. And for them to, finally make peace and do the Shield fist bump, and for them to, finally settle their rivalry and put this chapter behind us. Then officially, in this chapter, close this book, what have you. And that was great to see. And as I've said before, there's nothing wrong to admit that Roman is the bigger star. He's got the bigger career. And I always said, I stood 10 toes down, stuck to my guns. I was like, for someone of Roman's caliber, it's just like, you want to get that monkey off your back. You want to get that, to not constantly be nagged about something that you cannot achieve. And just as The Rock finally had closure to defeat Stone Cold at WrestleMania 19, I kept using that as a reference. Roman's going to get his closure by defeating Seth Rollins at SummerSlam, and to finally check that off his resume, to do the very thing that he was not able to do in that historic 13-16 day tribal chief title reign. So Roman at this point now is changing course. So for all the matches, that he, that he had that he interference with, he's rewriting that narrative to show that he can do these things on his own. That he doesn't have to be the Samoan Godfather that that looks for the outward uh, praise and applause and approval, but he is sure of himself. He is someone who um, who is more certain about his identity. You know, he knows that he is him. You know, and that he doesn't need outside interference. He doesn't need you know um, that constant public approval and things like that. So like I said, as far as that, it's just uh, Roman's definitely rewriting his story, rewriting his narrative, and it's great to see. And and of course not only that, but of course on Monday we saw that that there was a new rivalry starting to pop up in the form of LA Knight. Someone called him someone called him on Facebook. It was a local administrator night. I was like, yeah, pretty much. Um, and so so of course LA Knight uses typical IWC talking points, calling Roman fraud, he's signed third, and Roman put in his place, saying that Roman had to put in his place to say that megastars don't wear Walmart watches, and of course Roman flexed his watch, and it was like some AP watch, cost, which was in the six figures, range. I was like, man, he ready to fulfill. I mean, like he flexed on. I said, man, oh my gosh, when I found out what that price range was, I said, woof. All right, now, I mean, hey, like I said, I'm not a pocket watcher, but yeah, I was like, he definitely sunned him. Um, but the main thing that I would say Roman sunned him about was um, how LA Knight, was constantly calling him out for months, you know, crying and complaining about not getting a title shot. But Roman said, look, you know, um, what have you done to earn that besides, call me out and just waste my time? Like, rather he said, yeah, you people, my cousin's cool. You waste their time, but you're not wasting my time. So he was like, look, all that moaning and complaining, all that stuff, that doesn't work around here. He was like, look, if you want to do something, he was like, look, he was asking, what tournament have you won? Have you, put yourself in title contention? Like these battle royals, world rumbles, whatever the case is. To really put yourself in those positions. Um, so I know Ellen Knight was in that elimination chamber before Roman became champion, and he didn't do himself any favors with the way he did not do himself any favors with those botches. And of course, even though Roman never brought up how LA had never seized a world title shot without him being involved. So I was like, yeah, pretty much put him in his place and let him know that there's a hierarchy. And I think it's got to the point where I think the companies put LA Knight in this position just really to shut the fans up, because it's inevitable that that Roman's going to put another notch on his belt, another W on his resume, and move on. Because I feel as though we are on a fast track to Roman versus Obafemi. This is just a pit stop. You know what I mean? And the thing is, Roman was letting him know, letting LAK know that it was like Roman was letting everybody know that he doesn't give out make wish charity title shots, to people just to make them feel better and to massage their ego. You know what I mean? And for the fans who feel that type of way, feels a certain type of way, hey, let it be the case. You know what I mean? So as far as that, I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna be, like I said, I'm not gonna belabor this, that much longer. And Roman Reigns, of course, met up with Rey Mysterio for, like I said, the AAA meet up. I guess we're gonna get appearance there. Or at least there's gonna be a tournament, for the number one contender shot, for his world heavyweight title. And so my thing is, for people that want, that it's funny how the IWC, wants Roman to elevate, like for Roman to elevate younger stars, younger talent, but yet but yet they want to put their, eggs in the basket of a guy that's, is probably, I think he's even older than Roman. I'm like, come on now, like make up your mind. Obafemi's right there, so that's, like I said, that's there's full speed ahead. So eventually, I think this reign's gonna end at the hands of the ruler, of the ruler himself. So yeah, like I said, as far as that, that's pretty much it. And also, last but not least, congratulations to Bianca Belair and Montez Ford for the birth of their son. Who's his name? Romeo Leonardo Allen Crawford. Make sure that that's all due respect to them. I want to make sure I got the name right. But yeah, like that's right. Bianca made the announcement. She said, "Welcome to the world, Romeo Leonardo Allen Crawford." So I got the name right. There you go. Like I said, congratulations to them. Congratulations to the EST, who is officially an MOM. So now all three members of the big three are now moms. Jada was already one, but like I said, Naomi and Bianca have officially joined that club. So the only way that faction, that storyline was derailed was maternity leave, and I cannot wait. Like I said, congratulations to them. Take as much time, take all the time that you need for this maternity leave. But when they come back, I am ready for like I said, ready for for them to for business to pick back up, to get the ball back rolling, and like I said, and more storylines to be to be completed, and more more matches and more feuds. Like I said, just so much more ground to cover. But yeah, that's really what it is. And so before I go, I'll like to give birthday shout outs. So like I said, of course, on August 1st, Chuck D from Public Enemy turned 66. Devon Dudley, one half of the Dudley Boys, turned 54. So on August 4th, of course, 44th president, the 44th president, Barack Obama, the GOAT himself, turned 65. August 5th, of course, Patrick Ewing turned 64. August 6th, the Admiral David Robinson turned 61. And of course, on August 7th, of course, Sable turns 59. So, of course, August 8th, Shayna Baszler turns 46. On August 9th, of course, Whitney Houston would turn 63. Of course, NFL legend Deion Sanders turns 59. Of course, Alexa Bliss turns 35. On August 10th, Riddick Bowe turns 59. And on August 11th, Chris Hemsworth turns 43. And before I go, I like to give a word of wisdom. Is that of course, my word of wisdom is that God wants you to be an instrument of His love to people who try to destroy you. And the thing is, God wants us to show His love to people who did us wrong. And of course, it's all about forgiveness. But at the same time, it's important to forgive, but it's even just as important to be wise as well. And so I just want to say that that's my word of wisdom. Also remember that you are victorious because great is He that's in you than He that's in the world. We put God in first place. You don't have to worry about being in last place. And please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. And like I said, I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/@Von Virginia. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more great content. And thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.